All right, so we are hopping into our 13th session of the day on Validator tools, innovations on user experience. And I'm actually fortunate enough to be here with Gavin right here, and he's going to take my spot, and he will take it from there. This is for you. Hey, thank you.
Hey, all, and hey, Lorien and Mike.
Good to see you.
So I guess let's just kind of jump right in. I'm Gavin. I'll give a quick little bit of background, and then we'll ask you guys a little bit about where you're at and what brought you into this place. So I'm Gavin. I'm with IDEO Collab Ventures. I've been on the product and design side for a long time, same with the engineering. But Lorien and Mike, would you mind giving a little bit of background of kind of what got you into this space and what you guys are doing right now?
Sure, Mike. You want to go ahead?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Reinhart. I work at Obsidian Systems. And I got into crypto back in about middle of 2017. I was introduced to it to some people, and I kind of quickly became pretty interested in the technical aspects. I was reading white papers on subway rides and things like that. And shortly after was when I met people from Obsidian Systems, and we had a lot of, we really kind of lined up very well with each other. And, the rest, I've been working now through Obsidian Systems on the Tezos protocol for almost 2 years now.
Thank you. My name is Lorien Gabel. I'm a co-founder of Figment Networks. We're a Canadian-based staking and software services company. I'm one of 3 co-founders, and we've worked together for longer than I care to admit, but a couple decades. We come out of the data center space, cloud security space, and originally the ISP space a long time ago. So kind of put those 3 businesses together, and if you want to do something in crypto, then that pretty much is what staking is when you combine those 3 skill sets. So that's kind of how we fell into this. We launched early last year. We're 10 people. We're on 30, close to 30 main and test nets across the proof of stake ecosystem. So pretty wide coverage there. So look forward to meeting you all virtually and talking about tooling.
Awesome, you guys. Well, thanks for doing this today. All right, since we're talking about UX and user experience and tooling, one of the things that a lot of folks talk about is network participation. Right now, it's kind of a mixed bag, right? How do you guys think about encouraging participation in kind of what you're building right now, whether it's governance decisions, things like that? Because there's, the tragedy of the commons, or you get scenarios where a lot of people hold a lot. And anyways, how do you guys avoid the tragedy, or how do you engage people in the product?
I'll go ahead first with this one. So I think a lot of this comes down to incentive alignment, and how can you make sure that all the participants have the right incentives aligned so that they're good actors within the network. And the incentives are really already aligned for a lot of these protocols, so that all the participants are, really they have everything set forth for them to want to be, good actors. They have rewards mechanisms that are on the protocol that are going to encourage them to, do things that really benefit the entire ecosystem. But oftentimes they just need education. And so for instances where you see that those incentives might not align, it's really because maybe they're not fully aware of these things. And so I think a really kind of interesting example of this comes back to kind of testnet participation and what we saw recently in the Babylon amendment for Tezos, where people, they generally just haven't participated as much in test networks because they kind of trust other people to do it. They trust the core protocol developers. And there was just a slight miscalculation in protocol rewards, and endorsements just paid out slightly less. But people really noticed that very quickly. And it reminded them, I think, that their incentives, to participate in these test networks and to kind of look after the protocol. And now we see much greater test network participation from people on the protocol as a result. And that'll be fixed in the Carthage Amendment, which will probably go live in about a month from now. But I think it kind of comes back down to, with the incentives already being aligned, education, reminders, examples, things like that.
That's great. Anything, Lorien, on your end?
Yeah, so we've, our kind of, when we had to come up with somewhat of a, sorry to use the word, a mission statement, but was really trying to figure out how to enable these networks to be successful. And so that started with staking and node infrastructure, which is kind of the first thing these live networks need. or testnet and livenet needs. So they need node operators basically, which is, in some ways a kind of simple business, and in other ways can be very complicated. But then after that, like, what are the problems that these networks are going to have if they're going to be successful? So we broke it out into like 3 stages. So the first one would be that, you need a reliable set of validators, and you need to coordinate them in some way through testnet and mainnet. So we've built some tooling. We have a software tool called Hubble, which basically is a set of validator tools, alerting, and a coordinating mechanism. So the first participants in these networks, which really are validators. And then, if you sort of look at like who next is going to have problems, well, it's going to be the investors and the token holders. And so they're going to have a set of decisions to make around staking, data, earnings, tax. And so we've tried to then provide a set of services around that to those next stakeholders. And then, eventually, hopefully, if the networks actually prove useful for something, that there'll be a set of application and end users. And then hopefully at that time, we'll be able to find a set of access services that supports them. So really, we see that, staking is kind of how you start, because that's the first thing that happens on these networks. And then as the ecosystem grows, the needs grow, and hopefully we and other people can meet some of those needs. And we've tried to always attach a monetary value, not to be totally mercenary, but if people are willing to pay you for something, then it's a pretty good sign that it's needed. And so, an example of that is, for example, we've sort of taken a lead in the governance on Cosmos as an example, and so we submitted an on-chain proposal which recently passed to pay us to basically kickstart the community governance to get people involved. And so we'll get paid an amount for a period of time that will hopefully sort of build the governance infrastructure, and then we can step out of the way. So that's just one specific example, and that's the community value that enough to pay us something for it. So that's kind of our approach to it.
This is actually one of the interesting things about both of you guys being on here. It's like, Mike, you're focused on one specific community, and Lorien, you're building kind of a generalized platform in Hubble. Lorien, on your side, with regards to Hubble, like, what are some of the challenges associated with building kind of this generalized staking infrastructure? You guys are working across a slew of different networks.
Yeah. So, I had said, if you start with staking infrastructure, and if you're thinking of, becoming a validator, in some sense, at a high level, it's kind of all the same, but each network is very, very different. So one of the things that running a node does is give you a lot of information about that network, from economic incentives to the requirements of the community, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the ways, like, to gain enough knowledge about a given network is to start with running a node, because it kind of forces you to, run a full node, kind of learn about the community, get engaged, and then you can sort of see if there's other problems to solve. So across 30 networks, it requires the way that scales actually is people-wise, because you need a fair amount of expertise in each network. All the economic incentives are different, the governance mechanisms are different. So the business scales that way, rather than how you usually scale kind of a tech business. So it requires some relatively smart people to engage pretty deeply on these networks. It's difficult. So
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. And you can't do all of them. I mean, frankly, we're on 30 networks, but we probably care about 7 or 8 of them that we really have a lot of faith in, and those are the ones where we devote most of our resources, and then we participate in the other ones really just sort of to keep an eye on them. Might have customers who have an interest and have tokens in one of those networks, but it would be very difficult without a large organization to go deep into like 30 networks, obviously.
If you can summarize this one in like 10 seconds, I'm super curious. How the hell did you guys even approach the design of Hubble, right? Like the design of interaction with all these different networks in a generalized way.
Yeah, it was a complete failure of imagination. So it was really up until literally last month, we had no product management function. We built a set of internal tools for ourselves, monitoring tools. We were like, we have these nodes, or the monitoring tools, alerting tools, there are none. So we need to build it. And then we sort of realized that, these are going to be valuable to the community, our competitors too, but it'll give us some brand recognition. So it really started off as kind of like a mistake.
As all good things do.
And all of a sudden, more and more protocols are like, hey, we could use this as we're launching. Can you build a version of it for us? And then, because we're kind of slow, infrastructure guys, it didn't occur to us for probably 6 to 7 months that, we might have like a scalable software product here. So it took a while, but really it was like we built something for ourselves, kind of it's pretty common, and then other people wanted it, and then we figured out how we could make some money in an open source environment, and also give ourselves a little bit of brand awareness. You have to be careful because we're selling services to our competitors in some way, but then your other validators they are competitors, but you kind of need each other. Like, you wouldn't want to be on a network with like 4 validators, obviously, right? So it's this kind of weird frenemy cooperation. We have Slack groups with probably 6 or 7 of our biggest competitors and share information, but not too much. So it's kind of neat in that way. So
yeah, the dynamics in this place are great. I mean, you didn't see these things 10 years ago, but it's really awesome to be in a space where you actually have these things where coordinating is more beneficial than just everybody isolating.
That's right.
I perhaps, I have the liberty of not being a validator myself, but I always feel like a lot of the best actors do exactly that. They are producing tools because they feel that they're very useful for themselves, and then they get it to a point where they say, oh, wow, this is great for us, and then they make it available to everybody else, and the protocol ends up being better as a result. I mean, you guys may be competing, say, for delegates or nominators or things like that, but ultimately, there's that shared interest in the overall well-being and health of the network that everyone really kind of benefits from.
Right.
Well, and you guys, I mean, you know about that as well as anybody, Mike. I was watching some of your videos this week on just like you speaking about the network and some of the work you've been doing. And the care about what you build and how you build for the community is apparent. So can you describe a little bit about what it's like building things for the Tezos community kind of in general, what it's like to build for, because I mean, the baking was extremely unique when it was rolled out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take a second to just kind of scale back and kind of introduce Obsidian Systems a little bit more to people who aren't familiar with us. So we are a software product consultancy, and what that means is we do everything from design to management and really high quality development of companies ranging from research institutions to startups that are just getting off the ground to blockchains that are just getting up off the ground. And we're certainly most well known, especially in staking, for a lot of the work that we've done with Tezos. But we've also done contributions for other blockchains such as Cadena, which is more proof of work and also focused really on the packed smart contract language. But we're in active conversations with many other actors and helping out in any ways that we can. But you're right, there was really some very unique opportunities and experiences early days with baking and getting that ecosystem up and running. The Tezos community they've been great. I've seen a lot of really high quality engagements across bakers or validators. We can use those interchangeably. One of the things we did as we were doing software development, the primary products that we were launching around the launch of the network was the hardware wallet ledger application, which is a wallet app, and then we also released the baking application for the Ledger Nano S, which was the first block validating application for a consumer hardware wallet.
I remember.
Yes, and we were in Slack going back and forth with validators, and here's a new version, try it out, and then we would get the feedback from them immediately and go back and forth. And we even had merge requests that came through from community members who had code ideas or ways for parsing contracts in the future, and it was really encouraging. And when I look and when I follow what's going on in a lot of other protocols that are either getting ready for a launch or have already launched. In Discord with Cello and, in Riot with the Kusama Validator Lounge, I see all those same things. I see a lot of the same people, but I see a lot of the same behavior where most often these validator communities are very open and receptive. And, they're great on-ramps, talking to people in these places.
Awesome. Speaking of the, just open and receptive, out of all the kind of networks and communities out there, which networks do you guys think are getting it right in terms of engagement and why? Like, Lorien, you mentioned you guys are leaning into Cosmos on that end. Why, I guess just why the decisions? What's particularly working well there? And are there any examples of kind of things you think that are not going well in different networks based on whatever their incentive mechanisms are?
Right. So I would certainly see Tezos has an extremely engaged community on multiple levels. They were pretty much the first of the sort of next generation of staking networks, so they've done a great job. And I don't know what the current number of bakers are, but it's a pretty big number.
450 or so. Yeah.
There you go. So, which is kind of awesome. So, so certainly them. Cosmos has a pretty engaged community, and that was built up over like a very long testnet process, which I think they managed very well. Almost a year, which was great. So you have a very good group of core. It's the network slowly decentralizing. It was pretty centralized at the start, just from where you look at the stake distribution. But it's certainly every month it gets a little more distributed, which is pretty cool. I would say Polkadot's doing a pretty good job. Polkadot, which is or Kusama, which is the not testnet to Polkadot, that has a pretty high level of engagement pretty quickly. So they're doing very well, and it's kind of an interesting approach. They say their testnet's going to be live, and in theory could be a workable network, and the tokens may accrue value, maybe not. So they've taken a pretty interesting approach. So those sort of come to mind. Cello is doing a great job from a testnet engagement perspective. They've gotten they've run this pretty interesting incentivized testnet, and it has, I would say, probably the highest engagement I've seen since Cosmos and Tezos. So they've done a really good job, but people are still, there's still not a big enough sample set to see what really works or not. So there's a lot of experimentation going on. So
yeah.
And then without sort of naming names, but crypto has crypto has a wide variety of skill set in teams. Let's put it that way. And I would say there are some teams out there that sort of lack in basic project management and communication skills. And so launching a decentralized software product essentially has not really been done that often before. And at minimum, you need a team that is very effective at communication, deadlines, and basic kind of project management skills. And there are a couple of notable teams that have really failed on that. Not being able to run a good conference call, not doing regular check-ins, not communicating in a regular and effective fashion. So if you were, that's sort of when I talk to protocol teams, I'm like, the advice is actually pretty straightforward, sort of get the blocking and tackling done, get the basics done, and it is often absent, unfortunately. So
yeah.
That's a really great point about needing more than just the development resources to do these things right, because as we know, these are coordination efforts. And if you're not capable of kind of coordinating the social layer of this, then you're kind of putting yourself at a disadvantage. And I think, what networks are now doing with incentivized test networks, that's not something that happened, back with the initial launch of BetaNet for Tezos, but it's something that, modeling themselves off of what Cosmos has done, we see a lot of networks doing with great success these days. And if anything, I don't think I have any specific examples that I can think of where people are necessarily doing things wrong, but rather it's the lack of doing things where I think sometimes protocols can trip themselves up and trying to ship that perfect end product, and they've got everything tweaked down to the point where it's they're really sure that this thing is going to succeed. By that point, how many months between when you launch a product, when all your validators are now, they would have been your validators, but now they're too busy with upteen other networks that have launched, and the fanfare is kind of gone. I think the idea of just shipping something and moving forward is really valuable.
And the social coordination, while you can solve with software tools, in the end of the day, it kind of is a people activity. You really need to do some one-on-one and really sort of be out there. And the teams that have had, I think, some success have spent a lot of time on project managing and doing good community relations. So
yeah, it always comes back to people. There's just no getting away from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Real quick, summarize, because there's a lot of new people kind of looking at getting into the industry and things. If you had a quick way to summarize the evolution, because it's happening pretty quick, into incentivized testnets, how would you describe that movement from just kind of rolling out testnets, and what has been the success of incentivized testnets just for engagement, real quick?
So I think that, one of the things it does is you need more than the code to get the network off. And you need validators who are also really well trained in running that protocol. You can't just have the software be right. And so I think that what it does is it exposes people to harsh network conditions. And by putting out the harsh network conditions and then training that validator set, when the live network goes up and things start going haywire, updates don't quite happen the way that they should, you already have trained personnel who are used to it and who have already been coordinating with each other, and they've gotten a little bit of something in return. It kind of really works out best for both parties.
Yeah, that's perfect. Awesome. In terms of these cohorts of validators. It's like outside of exchanges and it's like validator interfaces are kind of one of the primary places where people are going to have interactions with these networks. So what's the role of validators as access points for people? Like, how do you imagine your role as like teaching people about networks, what important decisions are, things like that, or for just validators in general?
Yeah, education is super important. So, like each one of these networks is pretty different. So having educational resources is important. I would say that there's a whole wrapper set of services you could provide around the activity of staking to help a token holder, like tax reporting, that type of thing, which people are just now figuring out that some of these networks weren't built with the greatest transaction tracking.
I noticed that prominently on Figment.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, what Obsidian is doing, the actual activity of staking, having a ledger, for self-custody people, having a way to do it via ledger, and not making people use a CLI, command line interface, is like super important. We've started recommending to networks that they don't launch until they've done at minimum a ledger integration, because it's just, it's getting people to do that is one more difficult step. And if there is just a command line interface to stake, which in a lot of is the case, then you have to be prepared to like handhold people through that. So. But,
yeah, and some of the tools that people are talking about here that Lorraine's mentioned, I should mention that I think two of the things that we've done for validators are, the first is that ledger baking app, which basically allows you to stake your tokens, where you are placing down deposits for the rights to bake a block, or to endorse it, or the similar features in other networks, but to keep your tokens on a hardware wallet. So your private key is never exposed. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, where you have optimal key security, but high availability, where you're able to place a deposit whenever you're asked to. We've also built a product we call Kiln, which is a user interface for doing baking. And so it does everything that you would possibly need to participate in the Tezos network as a validator through an easy-to-use user interface. You don't have to use the command line at all to run your node, run your baker and endorser, to vote on protocol amendments. And it does it all with your Ledger Nano S. So it's kind of the great pairing between, keeping that key security we just talked about, but also as easy as possible usability. But kind of to more directly answer your question about, validator roles and, what's the role that they're going to play in this network. First and foremost is the obvious things. I think protecting your users from slashing, or your delegates from slashing, is most important. Tezos, you kind of get that for free because it's only the validator funds who are up for slashing, but in other networks, your delegates or your nominators, their funds are also at risk. So first and foremost, protect those user funds. After that is definitely delegate engagement. Hey, I'm voting for this protocol amendment for this reason, or, I'm taking a poll. How would you guys like me to be voting on this? Where do you sit on the fence with this? And as Lorien mentioned, there's the education aspect. It's probably not a requirement, but kind of like as we mentioned in terms of intra-validator communication, those who play the long game and build a great reputation are going to ultimately accumulate the most delegates and the most stake. And kind of having that foresight and being willing to kind of engage with people who are, kind of trusting you socially, really goes a long way in the long run.
So, I mean, you just, speaking of like just some of the heavy lifts, and you've got key management, you've got a lot of things you're doing as you're building some of these services. So like, what actually today are the hardest challenges kind of associated with building a decent user experience? And do they stem from just people, like lack of familiarity with cryptocurrency in general, or, the way the underlying protocol is designed? What are just some of the hairballs you guys run into in terms of creating a decent user experience?
I would say that still most of the software, if you call it software, is still in beta. Like even if it's in mainnet, it's very often still in beta. So you can build instructions, you can build UXs, but the software changes really quickly. So I would say that's the biggest issue. Like a lot of these, I mean, even Tezos, the most established one, and has had pretty successful upgrades. I mean, there's been a few hiccups, but even like, there are still hiccups. So you try to make something easy, but then the software isn't that well tested, frankly, yet, across all networks. And And then, so dealing with that sort of variability on a constantly daily basis is probably the most difficult. So
I feel like being true to the protocol while also trying to abstract away the complexities about what's going on underneath and finding the right balance between those things is one of what's really most difficult. And I have a kind of what I think is a kind of funny anecdotal example of that. So in Kiln, we let you know when your next endorsement or block is going to be coming up. And so we tell you, hey, here's when your next write is. And because of the way things work, you may endorse, block 1, but you don't know if you've successfully endorsed it until it's included in block 2. So there's a period of time in our software where we say that your next endorsement is 20 seconds ago. And that does not make sense, and it shouldn't make sense, but it's kind of true to the protocol because in reality, your endorsement opportunity was 20 seconds ago, but we can't validate that you in fact did it correctly for another 40 seconds until the next block is baked. So we're kind of, it's in the past and in the future at the same time for a moment. And then we get that validation and then we move on to the next opportunity, or we actually know, hey, you missed this opportunity for whatever reason. And we've gotten into some pretty heated debates about that type of thing here in the office. But I think that's the challenge in it. And I enjoy that part of, trying to make it as true to the protocol as possible, but also as simple as possible. And, that's tough. I mean, people are used to, especially the best applications in the world, it's very fast finality, and you get that, immediate verification that you sent your funds, or, you opened your account, or you liked that tweet, or whatever it be. Block times don't always line up with that. You can't always get that instant finality. So that's a fun challenge with doing this.
Yeah, all the network idiosyncrasies are just kind of, they're a challenge to work with sometimes, and especially communicating that to people who are just getting involved. Yeah, you guys.
Just wait till you try to explain it to a government tax authority on when you actually had a reward or not.
Actually, there's a question that just poured into the channel here on crypto regulations and things like that. What off the cuff do you see crypto regulations changing validator incentives and things like that, and the change to the dynamics based on things coming down the pipeline?
Well, I think the regulatory, and depending on where you are, it's still a little unsettled. I think some of the biggest barriers to being a validator are, there's oftentimes a financial barrier, creating getting a minimum stake. There's the technical barrier, having the know-how how to do it, especially depending on the protocol. I think some have tougher requirements than others. But in terms of regulatory considerations, I think most people I talk to are taking the optimistic point of view, and I also take the optimistic point of view that we're going to reach conclusions that are kind of sensible for businesses. It's just a matter of what timeline that's going to occur in. And I know I'm talking from a very U.S. perspective here, but I think that things will settle out in a place that makes this a viable solution, and make these networks viable in the long term. But I think it's just and if they don't, perhaps it's on the protocols to amend themselves in a way that kind of does make that happen, although they are supposed to be permissionless at the end.
I was going to say, it's interesting because just the borderless nature of all this, seeing how it starts to, looks like we lost Lorien. He'll probably be back here momentarily, but he was having network issues.
Yeah. Well, and just to tease out another point with that, I think an interesting thing to see, regulatory wise, some networks like Cosmos, all of the delegate payouts are handled directly on chain. And that all happens completely automatically. Whereas if you're a Tezos baker and you're running a delegation service, that's all a very manual, off-chain process. And that's a way that a lot of businesses differentiate themselves. They pay out more frequently or earlier, and they can change their rates whenever they so choose. But does that mean because they're physically taking the act of doing it versus it being something that's encoded on the protocol, does that mean it's treated different from a regulatory perspective? I'm very interested in seeing how those types of questions shake out.
Yeah, likewise. So we got a lot. Let's talk a little bit about. So we talked a little bit about some of the challenges of starting some of this and working with networks, and actually how great it is to work with a particular network. You guys have been doing amazing work at Obsidian. It's been fun to follow it over the last couple of years. So for a lot of people who are potentially starting things, looking at getting into this, Is now a good time to be getting into the staking business, in your opinion, and why or why not?
I think it absolutely is. I think there's an explosion in popularity, and I think that the fact that this conference is going on is wonderful. I think it's a great idea, and I think it's really well timed. I think that with so many networks going live, you have such a swelling of demand that I think that
Uh-oh, I think we may have lost lost Mike as well. Hold on, everybody. We're getting things squared away on this end.
Sorry.
All right. Sorry, Mike, we lost you.
No, that's okay. So yeah, you were talking about people becoming involved in these test networks. I think it's a great time to do it, or in staking period and being a validator. I think that, if you're interested in doing these types of things, I've seen a lot of great content earlier from earlier panels. Go back and watch some of these videos if you haven't seen them already, and really just go ahead and jump into chats in Discord and in Riot, those types of places, and just start talking to people. Tell them you're interested. They'll probably send you some test network tokens, and go ahead and just try and break things or try and build the best setup you can. The test networks are a great place to play around, great place to start getting involved. And the communities have been really helpful from every single one that I've looked at. So it's a really great time to get involved.
So speaking of which, though, and getting involved, what are some of the barriers for teams that are looking at kind of kicking this thing off? There's a ton of things they have to tackle. Barriers to entry from your perspective. Yeah, I think, I was saying before, I think, in many cases, there's a financial barrier. I think there's two ways to approach it. Oftentimes, there's the professional validator group where you maybe have your own organization. Hello, Lorien. Hey, Lorien.
What happened? Everything.
No problem. We were just talking about barriers to entry for getting into being a validator and staking. And so, there's sometimes that financial barrier. There's oftentimes a technical barrier. You should probably have good experience dealing, working on the command line, working with cloud infrastructure, working with containers and key management. But I think that, in many of these networks, some are designed to have a smaller set of validators who are going to be much more professional. And some are designed to support both your professional validators and also your more your solo bakers or your home validators or your hobbyists, whatever you want to view it as. And I think, I personally think there's a benefit to trying to eliminate those technical barriers as much as you can. I think that that's something that Tezos has worked really hard on. And we've seen, because of their support on a lot of the tools that we've built, right? The fact that you can have a really secure at-home solution on a, now I guess these are about $60 US or so. From a $60 US device, you can have as good a key management as you could hope for. You can have a user interface for baking. And I think there's two benefits to try and knock those down as many as you can, but there will always be some of these barriers in place.
So even if you get it all right, I guess, what are some of the things that you just need to get right? If you're building a service and you've got a lot of things to consider, right? You've got security, you've got user experience, you've got a whole slew of things. Hey, Lorien, welcome back. It's all good. We're just basically, I was about to ask, in terms of, for people looking at starting services, it's like, what are the things you actually need to nail? This can include UX, but it also just, in terms of what you need to get right across the stack to start operating something, what are the things you absolutely have to get right to start a service? Uh-oh. Lorien, we're having really choppy audio on your end. Lost video. That might free up audio.
I could jump in on this one. Private key, key security, number one.
Get that right.
Yeah, I was listening to Luke's session from about an hour ago, and he was talking about, if you lose your key, you're done. You lose your funds. So that is of the utmost importance, is your key security. After that, oftentimes it's going to be infrastructure uptime. Some protocols will slash you just for not being available and not having your uptime. So I think that making sure that you're highly available and that your keys are also highly available That is probably the second most important part and piece. And then third, I'm going to venture out and say reputation, simply because if you don't have a good reputation, then you're not going to get delegates and you're not going to get stake. And if you look at networks where there's only a limited number of validators, like in Cosmos or in Polkadot, if you don't have the reputation and you're not attracting delegates from being a good actor, then you're just not going to, unless you have this outsized financial investment that you can make, you're not going to be able to compete with those who are, doing all the right things socially.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch how, because the idea of reputation and trustless, there you have these interesting tensions as this thing whole kind of evolves, right? So you've been watching a whole lot of things, and I'm curious from your perspective on the biggest mistakes you've seen made from validation services or new services, or just the mistakes you've seen along the way, or that you guys have made along the way that you can share for people who are building things. Like the things basically you wouldn't do again, or you've seen people do that maybe they shouldn't do.
Okay. So things that I would advise against. Most of the times, the stealth mode release doesn't really go that well because you don't really get the feedback you need early enough to make it go well.
What do you mean when you say stealth mode release?
Stealth mode release,
to a closed group, or?
Yeah, well, more just more not getting feedback on a product, right? So if you try and make, oftentimes you can get caught up in the idea that, hey, I'm a validator and I'm going to build this, as best as I possibly can, and I think because this works for me, or I think that everyone else is going to love it for the same reasons. I think that this is all open source software, and I think that being very open about the things that you're working on and the things that you're developing is best. And also that's a really easy way to gather mind share. So if you put yourself out there and you say, hey, I'm going to be building this, or I'm really interested in this and I'm going to work on this, maybe now you're a great target for getting a grant for working on that thing. Or maybe someone's going to really love your idea and they're going to want to work with you on it. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, so speaking of which, it's like, so one of the interesting thing, like the difference between what you're working on and what Lorien's working on is like, you guys get to focus really well and deeply on a particular community. So how do you engage the community? Like, are there people on your team? How do you focus on engaging the community and getting feedback for the product and things? What's the cycle like for you guys?
Yeah, we've been really fortunate to have the support that we've had from the foundation and from TQ to develop these tools that are really for the benefit of the entire ecosystem. I can give some tidbits from early days when we were first building Keln. We kind of built it for the most technical user possible, and then we worked our way down.
So why did you start there?
Because the early people who were baking on the test network or on Tezos to begin were all technical. They were all approaching this from the command line. And so we were asking ourselves, and really we wanted to provide really custom monitoring solutions for people who were baking on the Tezos network. And so we built everything, first as just a monitor. How can these people who are already, sophisticated and running this on their command line, how can we give them something that they're not going to get, just from PagerDuty or something like that? How can we give them contextual alerts that are a little bit more than they can get from an off-the-shelf service? And then that really kind of enabled us to get feedback from the people who were most educated about, what we were building on top of. And maybe they said, oh, well, I really, I don't care if my node is 1 block behind. I really care if it's 3 or so. And so we were doing design reviews with bakers. We put out questionnaires and Google Forms for them to just, what is it that you care about the most? Come and take a look at these designs with us. Is this, something that meets your needs? And, we've done a lot of that, through our Baker Slack. We have a Slack group with, I think, almost 1,000 members now who are interested in being bakers on the Tezos network. We continue to get great feedback from them. I answer at least a dozen emails every single week today of people who are just, how do I get involved in baking? I want to learn more about baking. How can we do this? And, I still personally answer all of those emails that come through our way. So we try our best to stay as closely coupled with the community as we can.
Oh, that's awesome.
Did we answer that regulatory question when I was?
No, you can jump back in.
Okay. Go ahead and fire away.
Great. Okay. Sorry about that. So regulation obviously is jurisdiction specific, but I would say that none of the protocols were really designed with regulations in mind. So one very sort of most immediate example that would be tax. So what are rewards, token rewards? It's not entirely clear what they are. You can make arguments that it's income. You can make arguments that it's not really income at all because you're really just maintaining your interest or losing interest in a network. So is it actually income at all? I'd argue like it's yield is an improper term. If it is income, then that's going to have implications for network security because token holders are going to have to sell their tokens, which is going to lower your security level in theory. So there's a whole bunch of sort of very practical implications, tax being the most immediate one. Most services are non-custodial if you're a validator, with the limited exception of sort of the Tezos Baker requirement. But being non-custodial will sort of avoid a lot of regulation in a lot of cases. But money transmitter laws, like in the US, could be an issue. So, we do some small things like never send tokens to a different address than the ones that delegated with you, because then you're not a money transmitter. Well, hopefully not a money transmitter. So there is I think that is probably the next big wave of issues once the tax one gets resolved. And then I think we'll sort of, so far, for example, in Canada, validating has been specifically exempted from a whole set of, regulations that might affect exchanges, but it's going to be jurisdiction specific, and I think it's going to be a larger issue in the next 12 to 24 months.
Boy, if you guys want a really dark take on possible outcomes of future staking, Ben Davenport wrote an article just about how Uncle Sam, just about taxes and anyways how ownership transfers over to, let's say the IRS ran validators. Anyways, it's really a dark future on potential paths.
And then leaving aside whatever the tax status of rewards are and when you actually earn a reward, you have to be able to track it. And a lot of the protocols actually don't have any mechanism. The rewards just show up. So there's actually, this is true. It was true in Cosmos up until the latest upgrade. So there's actually, you just like magically see awards show up in an account with no like time or value or a way to connect them. So you had to, we had to like take daily snapshots and archive that to do it. So there's a lot of sort of real world considerations I think that will need to be added over time via governance, hopefully, into these networks. So
I love the fact though that you have this tension though of like the networks push the necessity of here, just have it, and then everybody else has to figure out how it merges with the world, but you're not necessarily bending the design of the protocol around these, arbitrary and changing things. There's a question from some folks in the channel here of, this is to you, Lorien, but to people starting services, what's a better approach here? Basically serving a wide variety of networks, or running for a select few? Basically, which is best approach for someone starting?
I think I would go deep in one network that you care a lot about, however you define care, because you really believe in it, because you like the community, because there's some aspect of it that you think will be super helpful to solve real world problems in the future. So I would go deep and get involved in the community ahead of network launch. So actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I might sort of get some teeth running a node on an established network like Tezos. And then if you want to look at one other one, try to go deep and early testnet and get involved early. And then I think that also just running a node and expecting token holders to show up is probably pretty unlikely unless you've really participated in the community early on or are contributing something else like education or some type of software service. Like I think you have to do something else besides running good infrastructure.
That's a beautiful point. Participation it's like, that'd be my nudge. We work with a handful of protocols and a lot of projects, and it's like getting integrated into a community, not just for the sake of extraction or just whatever it is you're trying to gain for yourself, but to actually get meaningfully involved, to show up on the calls, to show up in the channels, ask questions, and also provide support while you're learning and not be embarrassed about asking anything nor helping anyone.
The only exception to that would be if you're a large bag holder. I mean, if you're a large token holder and you don't want to pay fees, then run your own node. You don't have to get involved, assuming you have enough to be in the active set. If that's a criteria for the network, then you can just run your own node and play around with it. And you kind of don't have to do anything. But if you're not, you're going to have to figure out a way to contribute. So
Well, true. I was gonna. Well, it's like you gotta have the majority actually do it. Otherwise, you really don't have a healthy network outside of that. And then you just have, you just have a bunch of nodes with no community, which I'm sure that would have a different dynamic. Actually, Lorien, I want to go back. So when you were having some network issues, Mike and I were talking about like kind of the topic of getting into the business, starting your own things. And I'm curious specifically for you, like what are some of the biggest mistakes you see operators making today, or some of the trip ups you guys have had that you can share, but basically some of the things that people should watch out for who are just getting into it or looking at getting into it?
So there's like we had mentioned slashing, and usually so this is kind of a very specific, and like there's only been a few slashing events, so slashing happens for something called double signing, which is kind of the worst thing you can do on a crypto network, because like double spending, basically, to like oversimplify a lot. So double signing, it's pretty hard to double sign if you're not malicious. However, it is very easy to double sign if you're like, oh, I need redundancy for my node. If it goes down, I need to have a backup, and I'm going to have that backup in the cloud. In fact, I'm going to have both my nodes in the cloud, and it's going to be automatic. And so in both, in the few slashing events that have occurred, you had validators who are running their backup node in the cloud automatically and so I would say most of these networks are structured so that you can be down and nothing bad happens. So you don't miss rewards, or you miss very little rewards. So I would generally optimize for not double signing, do manual require a person to turn on a backup and make sure your old node doesn't come online while you've done that, which is what happens. So you have both nodes online, and be okay with downtime, because in the decentralized network, any one network can be offline for whatever. I come from the data center world where you measured your SLAs and dot number of nines. You don't need to be up that long. You can be down for 6 or 7 hours in Cosmos, not miss any rewards. So if my advice was like, don't worry about downtime, make sure you don't double sign. So that would be kind of a high level piece of advice. Kind of a little bit specific, but probably pretty useful. So
I think that's a great example. I'm a little jealous I forgot that one and that you brought it up, right. Because I think in almost every single instance of double baking I can think of on Tezos so far has been from over aggressive redundancy. And let's say you miss a block or you miss an endorsement because you've got 2 minutes you're down or an hour where you're down. You'd much rather miss out on that small amount than what you would have lost from being too redundant and accidentally running two systems at the same time.
So there was a pretty big Google Cloud failure. There was one very large token holder who runs their own nodes in the cloud in Cosmos, for example, and they were down for 6 or 7 hours, but very smartly did not try to spin up another cloud node because they couldn't talk to Google at all. No one could talk to Google. It was a pretty big West Coast outage. And so what would have happened is they would have spun up another node, and then the cloud would have gone on, and they would have had two nodes running. So there's real world examples of it, and that would be careful. So
that is super practical. Everybody who was listening, I hope you got that one. All right. So speaking of kind of like along those lines, what's just the one piece of advice you'd give to anybody who's getting into the industry, who's starting to build right now?
Find a co-founder, have more than one person. That helps. So it's hard to be a single node operator. I know some people do it pretty well, unless it's kind of like a hobby. But if you want to make a business of it, this is kind of general startup advice at all, but I would always say try to have a co-founder that has complementary skills, non-identical and complementary skills. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially because you really are you're a technical provider, you're a community builder, you're an educational resource, and so having people that fill those different roles is really great advice. And beyond that, kind of echoing some of the things I said before, put yourself out there, jump into a channel and say, hey, me and so are thinking about spinning up a validator, and we just want to get involved right away. And, that is one of the best ways, if not the best way, that I've seen people, come in with little to no experience and then immediately, become validators and really kind of learn as they go, and really be kind of, welcomed into the community and grow their services. So, don't hesitate, jump right in, ask for help, and find a great co-founder.
Awesome advice, you guys. Mike, Lorien, really great having you guys on this. Thanks for taking the time.
It was a pleasure.
I think we're going to get ready to transition here to the next one. So everybody, thanks for tuning in, and we'll hand it off here in a second.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Great event. Thank you for hosting this event.
This is plugged in.
Hey, thanks, guys.